You're watching CNC3. It's the Morning Brew. I am Natalie Lagore. We're here with you this morning until 9 as we bring you coverage, discussions, and analyses about the budget that is going to be presented this afternoon at 1:30. The fiscal package for 2021 by the Honorable Colum Imbert. What's going to be in it? Your guess is as good as mine, but we know that according to the Minister of Finance, at least two things should not be in it, which is the devaluation of the TNT dollar and, of course, no cut in the public service. But we want to continue the discussions about Tobago. Tobago is kind of unique, a little bit different from Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the tourism factor, the size of the population and how it does business. So we're going to be speaking this time to Martin George, who is a lawyer, but also the head of the Tobago Business Chamber. Good morning to you, Mr. George.
Hi, good morning to you, Natalie, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago, and those who are watching and following you.
Especially Tobago.
Yes. Yes.
Listen, Mr. George, you know you're supposed to say that, Tobagonians like the little big up. Come on, man. Give Tobago a little shout out before we start.
Yes, yes. And they follow you from wherever. All over the world, Tobagonians follow your program. I know that.
Oh, that is so... Yes. Morning, Tobago. Morning to you. You see, I know you should give Tobago a little extra big up, But, Mr. George, welcome to the Morning Brew here with me. It's my pleasure having you. The budget 2021, the fiscal package will be presented this afternoon. What do you expect? What do you expect to come out of that budget presentation this afternoon?
Well, from a Tobago perspective, I expect that the minister will, as usual, tamp down upon the budgetary recommendations which have been presented by the Tobago House of Assembly. As you are well aware, Natalie, every year the charade is played out whereby the THA makes these requests for, sums of money which they know will not be granted. And when one considers what they actually do with it, when you look at it, the majority of what they ask for is always recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure makes up the largest share of their budgetary requests every year. So the thing is, as usual, of course, I think that they will not get all that they've asked for. And of course, when you have the same party in charge of the THA and in charge of government, they will of course put their tail between their legs and thank the government and say, yes, you did the best that you could in the circumstances. So that's the little game that is played out every year in terms of the budgetary allocations. And what we have been saying repeatedly is that we would like to see more of the budgetary allocation devoted to capital investment and infrastructural development in Tobago. In other words, lasting things which can ensure the sustained economic development of the island, not just paying wages and salaries and paying for rentals of vehicles and for hosting events and cultural functions. You need to have much more than that if you are talking about trying to build an economy.
Mr. George, but the reality is that even for Trinidad and Tobago, the government presents a $53 billion fiscal package, and that at the least $42 billion of that goes towards recurrent expenditure. I don't know that it's so unusual, the circumstances that Tobago is in terms of that most of its money goes towards recurrent expenditure. But
the difference, Natalie, is, and it's a fundamental difference, is that in Tobago, the THA/government, if you want to call it, is the largest employer, and the largest employer by far. And that's the problem, and that's what makes it unsustainable. You cannot have a scenario where in an island, your government is picking up the tab all the time for the employees' wages and salaries, the majority of persons living on the island. That's the main difference between Trinidad and Tobago. You see, in Trinidad, you have lots of private enterprises, lots of, manufacturing, lots of industry, etc. But in Tobago, it's really all about the THA as the, 85% employer in the island. And that's where the problem is. Because in other words, if all you're doing is just paying back salaries to your own employees, then that tells you that that's an unsustainable model, because then you're not generating any independent income there.
Right. I think even in Trinidad, the government is the largest employer, but you are right. The private sector is there, and the private sector definitely tries to pull its weight. So I think the percentage might be different in terms of how much the government might be contributing to employment, but I think it's the same in Trinidad, where the government is the major employer as compared to the private sector. But I hear you. In Tobago, it might be a lot more. I think it's about 85% of the jobs in Tobago are from the THA.
At a minimum.
Yeah, as compared to Trinidad, it might be about 60%. So definitely, yeah, definitely a difference there. But you know what? Tobago, as I said, is kind of different. And we've seen, you're right, that the THA presents these fiscal packages for most of the time over $4 billion. And the government just doesn't give it that kind of money. But the reality is that I don't know why the THA presents these fiscal packages, because it's like asking for about 8% of the country's allocation, the country's budget. It's asking for about 8% of its monies when constitutionally it's entitled, to 4.03%. But we've seen in the last couple of years where the Minister of Finance, regardless of what's happening, has been giving the THA about 4.4%. So the question is, why are we getting these $4 billion packages from the THA, knowing fully well that it's way beyond the 4.03%, and the government is really in a crunch?
Well, the thing is, what happens, Natalie, is that the THA has, over the years, failed to understand that what they call and what they refer to as a Tobago economy is not really an economy at all. It's really a Tobago dependency. So it's an economic dependency that you have in Tobago, because every year they go with the begging bowl to Trinidad for Trinidad to fill it up with money, and they come back to Tobago and they spend. They are not concerned about generating their own revenues. They talk about that, but they put nothing in place for that. So therefore, in those circumstances, it's like Oliver Twist, can I have a bit more, please? So they just keep going back. They want more. Now, the thing is, if it is that Tobago had to make some hard decisions to say, well, look, they had to justify by way of their revenue the expenditures that they are seeking, then of course the scenario would be quite different. And that's what we've always called for, because at the end of the day, while we understand the disadvantages that Tobago may face in terms of maybe access to goods, services, education, healthcare, everything, we are still of the view that there must be that push for self-sustainability, and not just relying on this economic dependency every year from central government. Because if central government were to ever cut the navel string, where does that leave Tobago?
Mr. George, would you suggest the THA reduce employment so that it can reduce the money that it is spending? Because as you rightfully pointed out, the reality is that a lot of this money is not going towards capital expenditure, but recurrent expenditure, transfers, subsidies, paying wages. So would you suggest that it cut its labor force?
Well, the thing is, okay, the smart way they can approach it is not to say that you just start off by cutting your labor force. What they need to do is to encourage entrepreneurship, encourage business development. They're supposed to, be creating the incubators for Tobagonians to become self-sufficient. They were supposed to be running courses, classes, showing people how to set up a business plan, how to, make a proper application to either the banks or the financial institutions for the loans. Because these are the things whereby basically you start teaching a man how to fish instead of having him to depend on you every day for you to give him a fish.
But we see, Mr. George, we see the enterprise development program where the THA does that. Do you believe that that is not sufficient or it's not working? Because I've seen people who've benefited from that, who've developed their business, who've gone from this small thing in-house to being a legitimate business where they can export, whether to Trinidad or even outside. So is it that more needs to be done?
More needs to be done, more needs to be done. The programs need to be expanded, and they need to be a part of a rigorous thrust towards empowering Tobagonians towards self-sufficiency. So in other words, they've started, but what we're saying is that not enough is being done in that regard, because the point is there are still too many persons who just don't even know how to begin. And even the access to those things, we get calls and requests all the time. People say they've put in their applications, they've heard nothing, they've been calling, all they're getting is a runaround. So the point is, while the programs are there as a start, more vigorous emphasis needs to be placed on actually working the programs, expanding them, and making sure they actually reach and benefit the persons who need it the most. So we're not saying that nothing is being done. We're saying that more needs to be done in that regard. And then once you start weaning people off of this dependency on the THA for a job, and persons can start, maybe running their own bed and breakfast, running their own proper car rental agencies, whatever you have, then these persons will recognize, but wait, hey, listen, I'm doing very well on my own. I don't need to go and line up outside the THA's doors looking for a job.
All right, Mr. George, what do you believe are the things that need to be addressed so that the private sector in Tobago can grow?
Well, we've called first and foremost for the immediate repeal of the foreign investment legislation, because the direct foreign investment to Tobago was cut to zero since 2008, when you had the introduction of that legislation. And Tobago has not recovered since then, because you had lots of persons who had plans. There were 3 major hotel developments that an investment group from the UK had planned for Tobago. And with the introduction of that legislation, everything ground to a halt. There are lots of other plans that persons had. There was a company from Germany that planned to do major investments in Tobago. So we need to get back that direct foreign investment. And I don't understand why this is a hard sell for the government, because at the end of the day, you get an immediate injection of the much needed foreign exchange coming straight into your country. So I don't see why that is something difficult for the government to understand. All the other islands of the Caribbean, if you look at them, they make it easy for investors to pump money into their countries. Grenada is doing it, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, right. Barbados, Jamaica. Everybody is actually understanding the importance of the direct foreign investment. So that's one big start.
Mr. George, before you go on to the other point, but wasn't it the will of the Tobagonian people while we saw the Foreign Direct Investment Act come into play, because they were worried that the country was being sold out to non-Tobagonians, even they don't even want Trinidadians over there to invest in business. So is it...
Right, it wasn't the will of the people, it was the will of the leaders of the THA at the time, and that is what has persisted. And as I told the then Chief Secretary, and it has proven to be a fact, I told him, I said, Chief, this makes absolutely no sense, because all you are doing is you are stopping the direct foreign investment, and what is going to happen is that wealthy Trinidadians will come across and they will buy the lands, because there's absolutely no bar to them buying and selling lands in Tobago. And that's exactly what has happened. So the point is, if their objective was to stop lands being sold, it has been a spectacular failure.
But Mr. George, let me just put you on notice already that we are almost out of time. I'm just waiting for my producer, Nikisha, to come in our ears and say, Natalie, you have to wrap. So let's see if we can get through some of this. You know how it is in television. Time is of the essence. But
yes, well, then let me just make one point.
Before you go, though, my understanding is that foreign direct investment in Tobago, even before this act came into play, was just about 3%. Is that correct?
Right, but the point is, it was on the rise, and that's the thing. So the issue is that we need to get it back moving forward. It was small, but it was on the rise. And the thing is, of course, you can control it, you can manage it. We're not saying that to have it, to just have it, as an open sesame. We're saying that, look, you can control it and manage it, but the point is you need to get back there. We're also asking, and I know it's something that persons consider to be a radical request, but we will keep asking for it. We're asking that Tobago be made a VAT-free zone.
Stop, Mr. George, because I was so excited that you're coming this morning to talk about that. Now, while I understand the desire for a VAT-free zone, I've been trying to work out in my mind how it would work, because you're coming to Trinidad, that's not a VAT-free zone, to buy goods and services that may attract VAT. So how does it work out for the businessman who has to come to Trinidad and buy a lot of stuff here and then go and sell it VAT-free? Will it make sense economically?
You don't, and that's the issue. You don't necessarily have to purchase it from Trinidad. In other words, I mean, the average Tobagonian is on Google, they're on Amazon, shopping all the time. So the point is, you will then develop such a wonderful industry whereby persons will be able to actually import things directly to Tobago. We have our customs division here in Tobago. You can import things directly into Tobago. You don't have to go through Trinidad. You don't have to land it in Trinidad and then bring it to Tobago. You can have stuff coming directly here. And not just that, I'll tell you, Natalie, it's such an exciting idea. Every Trinidadian who wishes to say, well, look, let me come for a weekend in Tobago, they will be so excited and happy at the prospect of spending their weekend where they don't pay any VAT. You will attract persons who will want to retire in Tobago. Most Trinidadians, after they retired, they would want just to relax in a nice, peaceful place, and the attraction of not having to pay VAT, that's 12.5% less on every bill that you have to pay. Persons would flock to Tobago.
I agree with you, but what are the implications? What are the implications for the government if Tobago becomes a VAT-free zone? Because one, you're suggesting that people may go and buy outside of Trinidad, which means that sales in Trinidad might be cut, and not only that, they're losing VAT returns on all the goods and services that would be in Tobago.
Right, and this is where I always tie my ideas together in terms of bringing it back to the reduction of the economic dependency. So in other words, once you have this and you recognize that, look, Tobago is now getting much more direct investment, both foreign and local. Persons might be willing to say, well, look, let me set up my corporate headquarters in Tobago. Let me set up my business in Tobago, because all the goods and services I purchase in Tobago will be VAT-free. Then, of course, you now marry that with a reduced budgetary allocation to Tobago, because Tobago is now becoming self-sustainable, because they're now generating their own income. And that's what we keep pressing for. That's what we keep emphasizing, because at the end of the day, the economic dependency is unsustainable in the long term.
Right. All right, so you're suggesting a VAT-free zone and, of course, the repeal of the Foreign Direct Investment Act. I see you're also asking for a 25% of local labor on capital projects, but isn't that happening as it is for capital projects in Tobago?
No, the thing is, we're asking that it be made a mandatory requirement. In other words, we're saying that, look, any major infrastructural development to take place in Tobago, we're asking for a minimum 25% contractor and labor input. Now, we emphasize contractor because what we want is for our Tobago contractors to be able to benefit from the knowledge exchange, this learning the skill set, being able to work alongside major international contractors to see how things are done. So therefore, you have that knowledge transfer so that they will now be able to have the skills, the knowledge, the education, the learning to be able to now take on bigger and bigger projects, because that's how you grow and develop industries. Even in the oil industry in Trinidad, that is exactly what occurred. You had the boys flying out from Houston, coming down to Trinidad, they were sharing their knowledge and experience. Then our boys going out to other places, in the Gulf, and they're learning and they bring back that knowledge. And that's how you grow your own industry, to the point where Trinidad and Tobago, we are basically, pioneers and leaders in terms of our knowledge base in the energy industry. So we're saying in Tobago, once you have major infrastructural projects, you need to ensure that there is that learning. The idea is not necessarily to say that you're given the handout for the benefit of the contract. We are more emphasizing the knowledge exchange and the growth and development of our contractors.
All right, well, I think the government should be able to do that one. I don't know about the VAT-free zone, especially in a time, not because it's a bad idea, but especially in a time of a pandemic where the government is crunching, looking all around, trying to figure out where it can find some money to conduct its business. I don't know if they're going to be willing to give up that 12.5% for an entire sector, especially a sector that normally generates a lot of VAT from the tourism sector.
Right, I know, but you see, Natalie, the thing is, sometimes I'll tell you, we need to be creative and innovative in our search for solutions. If it is that we keep doing the same thing every time, we can't expect different results. And, you know, that's how economies grow and develop, by making that change. There must be that game changer. You have to have something, what in economics you call a disruptor. You must have a disruptor to create a shakeup. COVID, in a way, has been a disruptor in many instances. You know, so you see, like, for instance, Zoom has benefited tremendously from the disruptive effect of COVID, because persons are not having in-person meetings anymore. They're using Zoom as we're using now. You know, so therefore, Microsoft Teams has become very popular. We use it in the courts all the time. I have stayed in my office in Tobago and done court of appeal matters in Trinidad using Microsoft Teams. So the thing is, you must always look for that disruptor. And we're saying that it may sound radical, but that can be the disruptor that can help to turn around things for both Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, let us see how that goes and if it's one of those things that the government will accept. But how has the THA responded to this suggestion?
Well, the thing is, actually, we didn't make the pitch to the THA because at the end of the day, the THA really has little or no say in these matters.
No, man. But I mean, procedurally, probably if you make the pitch, and if THA buys into it, then it can pitch it to the government as well. Because do you have a direct, line to central government?
They are well aware of this suggestion. So, I mean, if it is that it's something that they think can be useful, then of course, by all means, they're willing to, they're quite free to pitch it to the government. But at the end of the day, the way things work, it's very clear that the THA basically sends down a wish list, a happiness, you know, enterprise. And the government then says, okay, the reality is A, B, C.
I spoke to Mr. Jack about that, asking for $4.8 billion, especially during a pandemic. And he told me that they're aware of the situation and they bore it in mind when they were making the decisions. I mean, for me.
Yeah, and you wonder why they go through the charade every year, but I'm not a politician, so I don't know how politicians think.
Right. You're not a politician? You're sure?
Not at all. I stay very far from them.
All right, Mr. George, we do have to wrap, but your final comments before we go?
Well, the thing is, Natalie, as I always say, you know, I mean, we are in a crisis situation. We are in a pandemic. But, you know, in the midst of every crisis, there's always opportunity. And I am hoping that the government has done its homework, and through the think tank and, you know, all the economic advisors, that they have sought to look for the opportunities available in this pandemic. For instance, one opportunity that I think that the government had a good chance to, for instance, with Guyana's developing oil and gas industry, I thought that even when they were thinking of closing down Petrotrin, that was such a perfect opportunity to have a government-to-government arrangement whereby you say, listen, okay, all these employees from Petrotrin that I am retrenching or sending home or whatever, I am asking you from a government-to-government level, find places for them in your developing industry. We have the knowledge, we have the know-how, we have the expertise. Our guys, listen, we are ahead of the game in every respect. We have much more technological knowledge and information even than Venezuela when it comes to the oil and gas industry. So therefore, I thought that was an opportunity lost, whereby the government could have stepped in and said, and that would have softened the blow of the closure of Petrotrin. So it's in ways like this that I always say, in every crisis, look for the opportunity and try to make the most of it. So let's see what the Minister of Finance has to, you know, give us this afternoon. But I'm really hoping that they have found innovative ways to get us out of this situation.
All right, thank you so much for speaking with us this morning, Mr. George.
Always a pleasure, Natalie. Have a good morning.
Same to you. Martin George there, the chairman of the Tobago Business Chamber. And he's saying that the government needs to repeal the Foreign Investment Act, which is stifling bringing foreign direct investment into Tobago, and also get a mandatory 25% workforce when any capital projects are to be done in Tobago. And the one that probably shocking everybody, make Tobago a VAT-free zone. We take a break and we'll be back with you.